Hey, what's up, guys? It's Chase, and welcome to another exciting episode of the ELAV8 podcast. Today, Sam and I come together to discuss, is there another strike on the horizon for the film industry, as well as how is inflation affecting the average filmmaker, and lastly, should all the guilds come together to design their own streaming app to battle the streamers?
Because productions are not shooting at the moment, and also there might be another strike getting ready to take place.
We're literally looking at episode orders of 10, right? Which is crazy because the writers and the actors are still they're contracted to be available if the season continues, and they can't do more work past those 10 episodes.
Let me ask you something. How many residuals did the makers of Squid Game get off Netflix?
How much did they make?
$0.
They made
not
$0.
$1.
I genuinely believe the guilds should build their own streaming app. I think that the WGA, the SAG, IATSE, they should all come together and just build their own streaming app, call it Guild.
All right, so Jace asked me to flip the script this week because we're still playing with the format, and we get to do whatever we want here. So Jace led the way the last 2 weeks. I'm going to do it this time, mostly because I'm fired up a little bit. I had this idea for a show, and I think this is actually going to be a two-parter, but maybe it won't be. I don't know. We might get through all of it today, but it's a two-parter, which is like the state of the video industry. And there's sort of two aspects of that for me, which is the first one being what is the state of being a video content creator? And I'll save you the punchline of it, but it sucks, and we need to fix it. And then part two of this is Jason and I have spent the last however long talking about non-linear video editing, and there's a whole arms race, I think, that's happening between Adobe, Apple, Blackmagic, and CapCut, and what is actually going to take place over the next little while there. So, but that's for the post-production nerds, and this one is for the larger video creators. So he wanted me to go introduce this show. We're going to go and lay out why being a content creator absolutely sucks, and how to fix it. And I'm ready.
Okay. I guess my first question for you based on that is we recently went through a strike, and you told me there may be another strike coming. So let's revisit the first strike, I guess. What happened? Why did the WGA strike? Why did SAG strike? What was that about?
So this is very close to my heart. I watched this happen once before, and oddly, it all tied into the 2008 financial collapse in 2008, which is when I moved to Los Angeles, and I experienced this firsthand. I moved with an appropriately titled independent feature film called How I Got Lost, and I literally got lost in Los Angeles arriving there. It's where I figured out how to do everything, but fundamentally I showed up broke, $10,000 or $15,000, which was a lot of money for me at the time, in debt on credit cards, with no income coming in whatsoever, but transferring balances 1 month to the next. And overnight, they literally shut down my credit cards, jacked the interest rates up to 22%. There was no more minimum balances, and I was broke in a new city during a financial collapse. And the strike was happening too. That was when the writer's strike happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I personally think we are in a recession that no one's allowed to admit is actually happening. And I believe that the strikes were the studio's way of clearing house and preparing for the recession they knew that was coming. And also as a way to grind and starve out the artists and essentially make them subservient to the existing system. And so it began with a perfect storm of the writers' contract coming due, while simultaneously a month or two later the actors' contracts came due. And what happened was the perfect storm. Okay, so if the writers are striking, that's what happened in 2008. No big deal. Things grind to a halt for a little while. But when you suddenly have the actors strike come due as well, with the AI rights coming up, where basically what do the studios want? I mean, what did they really want? They wanted to basically give themselves permission to have you turn over your likeness to the studios on a single job, and then they own it perpetually in anything else they want to create, and they give you, a couple $100 for it and call it a day. That was the negotiating position they started with, which essentially created an existential struggle for creatives of all kinds, to figure out how they wanted to deal with essentially their likeness used in perpetuity by systems they don't control, as an AI, and have that be the negotiating thing on who actually owns this, what can you use it for, how does this happen. And it was a disaster of epic proportions that ground production to a halt. Only now in December did things come back on, but the only problem is things have not really fully come back on yet, because productions are not shooting at the moment. And also there might be another strike getting ready to take place. Los Angeles, which is IATSE, and the way things work in Hollywood is, believe it or not, post people were working for the most part during the strike, because they were working on the stuff that had filmed prior to the strike. And that has a, 3 month to a year long runway tail that sort of carries, right? So we're only catching up now on the fact that nothing has really been shooting for 6 months, and post people are starting to feel it now. And IATSE has all the post people in that union, and everybody's looking at this, and there's another contract coming due, and things have not even started to pick up shooting yet since things stopped. Hollywood is very quiet. There's very few jobs. Reality TV as an industry is completely dismantling itself. Things have become incredibly risk averse. All of the intellectual property has already been made, and we're coming into a last possible strike, which is essentially destroying Los Angeles as we've known it for the last 30 to 40 years. And the question is, will it come back? I can talk about billboards and things they're actively doing to destroy the long-term infrastructure of Los Angeles as a town that actually shoots. But I don't know. That's setting the stage. Where do you want to go next, Jace?
I mean, that was a lot. So I'm keeping track of everything, right? So I think the first important thing that people need to understand, and you kind of glossed over it, is what is IATSE? I think that's important. Let's give some context to what that union is and separate the unions that you just previously discussed.
Okay, so it's basically the crew people, for the most part. So that is like editors, etc. To be honest, I don't even know all of the people that it houses. Quite honestly, I do know that professional editors. I was a member of Local 700, which is part of IATSE, but it's the tradespeople. It's the crew people are coming in through that. And so you had actors get their deal negotiated. You had writers get their deal negotiated. The DGA, the Directors Guild, which is separate from IATSE, got their deal negotiated. But then there's all these other people on these productions, and a lot of that is IATSE, right? So this is the last piece where they haven't talked through their rights and their residuals and how all of those things come together, and the biggest thing for them, right, is how many and what are their rights when they're on set. So for editors, right, it's what is the base pay, and what do you get per day, all of the benefits, all the various things are what gets negotiated. How do shows work on a fundamental level? All of these things are changing, and by the way, they're changing in the sense that we're also getting ready to enter into a global collaborative world, right, where you can literally collaborate with people anywhere in the world on any type of show, on any type of storage, and then you have to manage that infrastructure. And if you listened to the podcast we did last week with Sasha, who was like, for every new technology, you get two new problems. I mean, get ready for that one.
Okay. All right. So I want to rewind back to the beginning a little bit, and let's talk about the reason why these contracts are being renegotiated at the end of the day, right? So a lot of people tend to forget that television seasons used to be 22, 24 episodes, right? And we've now entered into this realm where our content consumption habits can't be satisfied or satiated. And now we're literally looking at episode orders of 10, right? Which is crazy because the writers and the actors are still they're contracted to be available if the season continues, and they can't like do more work past those 10 episodes.
This is really important, by the way, because we're also dealing with a fundamental shift. And this is what the strike really should have been about, but it wasn't. This was about residuals, right? So if you think about the way residuals used to get paid, they got paid because everything ended up being aired on TV networks. There was box office grosses. There was a completely different system for consuming content. But you know how we
sales. Yeah.
DVD sales. So, like, do you know how content gets consumed now? Simple question for you, Jace, which is it's all through subscription services.
Mhm.
Is it easy for people to figure out how many people have watched a given program?
So this is where I'm going to get incredibly frustrated. It's so easy to determine this, right? And I don't know how you stand on this, but like, the past metric system that we used to abide by was Nielsen, right? Nielsen was God. Based on Nielsen ratings is how much, monetization you could attribute from the advertisers to the show. You'd be like, oh, this is a moneymaker for us. Let's keep it on the air, right? And that's how the studios decided this. And I could argue that tracking everything, not from just, witnessing and consumption, right? Like studying what the KPIs of that. What is its impressions? Like it's so easy for us not only to determine the impressions of the content and what it's making using these digital services, but it's also easier to say, oh, this drove conversion, right? Because there's all these things in the streamers on watching on all these devices with cookies that are now embedded within the content. You can say, oh, after they finish watching this content that happened to promote this sweater, this person converted and they purchased it, right? So it's actually insane to me that because I understand where you're going, is that monetization has shrunk when, in my opinion, it should be growing because you can attribute sales to these programs.
Yeah, but the old system, Jace,
Yeah.
paid out and provided, Seinfeld residuals, right? Was all
Oh
based
yeah.
on if you got into syndication. And
Mhm.
that's you could live the rest of your life off of syndication money. So a lot of creators, the way they participated in the success of their projects was through this model, box office grosses, syndication. Let me ask you something. How many residuals did the makers of Squid Game get off Netflix?
I don't know the answer to this, but I'm really excited because I heard Aaron Paul's response on Breaking Bad. So how much? How much do they make?
$0.
They made
Not
$0.
$1.
Yeah,
Nothing. They got nothing, Jace. They got
that's
zero.
crazy. That's
So you can
crazy.
make a show like Squid Game and you can get screwed like that. And the reason for that is because this system was built for Hollywood studios. All of those Hollywood studios business models are completely broken and demolished. The people, the where we now get our content is subscription based through Apple, Disney Plus, Hulu, all of these Netflix, all of these services. And by design, the reason these analytics are easy, but they don't share them because they don't want to pay creatives. They want to own the content. And so they don't want creatives to participate in their own success. Also, these streaming services have gone into a massive content spree, basically being like, hey, we got all the subscriber money, but nothing they factored into was paying in ongoing royalties for any of it. And so their model is a fundamental like, oh, we're just going to make subscriber revenue. Or if you're Apple, you're like, oh, this is an additional way we're going to have content to keep people locked into the Apple walled garden, right? This is not an industry for them. This is a revenue stream, and it's
Mhm.
all very different. But when you look at it from the creative's perspective, it's basically indentured servitude where you do not participate in the success of your content.
Yeah, so just like touching on something you're like kind of on the peripheral of is what's funny is that Amazon Prime, it's upselling Prime, right? Like the Prime subscription is like I can get my packages for free. I'm not paying shipping costs. Apple, right? Apple TV Plus is they're upselling phones, because if you buy a new phone every year, you get a free subscription to Apple TV Plus. And we can go down the road like AT&T. You have an AT&T mobile phones provider as your provider, you get free HBO Max. It's like all these streaming content services are actually just upsells, right? They want you to have the core of like how they're generating the mass amount of their revenue, and they're adding this as a feature. So content not necessarily is the focus anymore, but it's a feature, and we're seeing that being distilled and the ramifications of it just trickling down to, like you're saying, the creatives.
And what you really saw was basically artists, video or filmmakers or creative visual artists got Spotified.
They did get a little bit Spotify, didn't they?
That's what happened. That's where we are. And that's what this strike is really about,
Mhm.
is everyone waking up to the new reality that the way they used to get paid, their cheese got moved.
So I have another question for you, all right? Because this is really, really fascinating to me. Do you think that inflation has a lot to do with what's happening right now within Hollywood? And I'll give you an example, because I did a little research before the podcast and was like, what was peak TV? Like when was like the peak TV era? And it's kind of funny. The phrase peak TV actually like drove a Google search, and it pulled something up called peak TV, and it was 2015, right? Like that's when like profits were generally going the highest, right? And that's when the slow decline started happening. So I wanted to do a conversion, because we're both financial nerds and we love looking at this kind of stuff. Is what was the dollar worth in 2015 versus today, right?
What
So
was it worth?
$1 would be the equivalent of $1.33 today, right? That's an inflation of 33%. So my question, going back to you, is how does that affect content being made? Because everything's going and becoming more expensive. And it's actually trickling down to the content providers themselves, because iCloud subscriptions have gotten more expensive. Prime subscriptions have gotten more expensive. Netflix subscriptions have gotten more expensive. Disney Plus subscriptions have gotten more expensive. And I did another Google search, because we talked about this like nerds, I think we were drinking a beer like a few months ago, and we were talking about the new cable package, right? Is that, you used to pay, a fixed cost, right? For, I get X amount of channels, they come down and I'll watch my show as it comes on at 7 p.m. every Thursday. Well, we both know that streamers have taken over, and the average amount of streaming subscriptions an American has is 3. Right. So if you multiply that times 16 or 15, I mean, Americans are spending $45 on just solely 3 subscriptions. And that does not even count for, their cell phone subscription, their internet subscription. So we are now in this like very robust, very expensive new modern cable package. So throwing it back to you, the inflation question, how does that affect us today?
Well, there's so much there. But I think what you just spelled out is everybody cut the cord because they had all these channels they didn't need, and they had all of these things they didn't want to have. But actually, they've replaced it with subscriptions that in the end are probably going to exceed what they used to pay on their cable bill. But what's really interesting, Jace, I mean, just a simple question is, do you think the average person's salary has gone up at the same amount as inflation has?
See, that's a rhetorical question, because like I'm going to say no, it absolutely has not gone up to match inflation.
So if you want to know who really has gotten broken then by this, it is the independent filmmaker. And I'll explain to you how and why. So currently in LA, I mean, we deal a lot with permitting, right? So Film LA, if you even want to start off shooting something in Los Angeles, because what happens, right, is when everything, traditional lanes of making revenue get ground down through inflation, and that's what inflation is going to do. So you're going to see, and when it, it's not that they're not going to raise how much people make salary wise, and they still have to make more money. And really, inflation is just hidden taxation that they don't have to pass as legislation. But that's a whole. I don't want to derail this. What I do want to talk about is when you have Film LA, and an independent filmmaker has to pay. You start with $900 just to start, just to get a anywhere in Hollywood ish. It's going to cost you $900 to shoot on the sidewalk. From there, you're going to add $600 probably. Your starting permit fee is going to be $1,500 right out of the gate. And you're dealing fundamentally with an industry of people who went to film school or acting school and said, I'm going to take a vow of poverty, and I'm going to go apply my art at a trade. And then I'm going to go to one of the two most expensive cities in the US, New York or Los Angeles, and I'm going to apply my vow of poverty trade. And then I have to find a way for somebody as I walk around town to see my talent, right? So what do you then have to do? You have to shoot your own content. And so if you're going to do that and you're going to go out and around, well, if your dollar buys 30% less and everything starts to cost significantly more and your rent is going to go up 30%, and all of these things are going to go up and your dollar is buying less, think about how much more money it costs the average starving artist to go make their content than it used to, unless you really, really know how the technology efficiency of making content has improved, which most people don't.
Hmm. You know what you just like this just made me depressed. You sent me down a rabbit hole in my head as you were talking about, right? So you're talking about the pious artists, right? They've moved here, they're going for it. So my question for you is what about the established artist, right? I'm gonna flip the script a little bit because the established artist is now in the union, right? And we both know what that means, right? In the beginning, peak TV 2015, being in the union was everything because you were protected, you were paid well, it basically guaranteed that you would have work. Right now, in a situation today where a lot of content is not being made because of everything you talked about with IATSE at the beginning, as well as the strikes that still we're feeling the ramifications of, right? Content is no longer staying in the United States, right? I think I read a report that a major production, I'm not going to say the name because I don't know if it's released yet publicly, and it's major, right? It's one of the top films that's going to be coming out in the next 2 years, has left the United States. Once again, I don't know if that's public, so I'm not going to say which film. And the reason why they're leaving is because the unions are too expensive, right? And I'm not anti-union. I want to clarify that. I'm pro-union because I love, what's happening in the film industry. It's just that with inflation, everything they had to fight for, it's actually made it too expensive to shoot here in the United States.
100%. And if you look at the way Los Angeles is fundamentally designed, it's a stupid place to make content that is getting dumber all the time because, I mean, like, let's be honest, do most people in the film and TV industry make more money relative to other industries?
I mean, historically, yes, but I don't know if that's true anymore.
Do you think they did? Like versus like
Let's talk about the top of the funnel versus the bottom of the funnel. Let me be more
the
accurate.
A-listers, right? But this doesn't, so this is a reflection. So like you're gonna have the oligarchism of the A-listers. They're always going to get paid because they're the bankable names, right? They're the ones who can afford to do all of this stuff, and they can, even with AI, they can subcontract their likeness out, and they're going to have the ability to do that, and that's still of value, right? So the top 1%, they're fine, they're covered. It doesn't matter. LA is a bubble for them. But the other people, the middle of the road, the people who used to pay themselves through the TV commercials they used to do, or the voiceover work, that was what the middle class like was typically arming themselves with. These are the people who now have crazy high rents or mortgages in and around Los Angeles, and like that work is evaporating because making anything in Los Angeles is like building the pyramids, right? So that's why you're going to see, in my opinion, and it's why I'm moving to Atlanta within the next 5 years. You're going to see Atlanta become the new Hollywood because you can actually afford a house there and you can actually go shoot things there because it's more spread out. Los Angeles, they're up on the gig, right? They know they know how to get you on every little last thing. And if the talent no longer has to be there and you have talent other places, it literally makes no sense to shoot in Los Angeles.
So I'm glad you brought that up because one of the things I was doing research on is the great exodus of California, right? And I'm not talking about like, people who are, just average people, like just trying something new. I'm talking about talent driven people like Mark Wahlberg left, Julia Roberts left, like some of the top A-list stars started
Joe
leaving.
Rogan.
Joe Rogan left. That was major. And this is outside of the companies that love California, but the tax situation that has now just really surfaced itself, inflation really driving people's decisions is a lot of celebrities just do not want to live here anymore. And why should they? Why should they if they can afford it and they don't mind flying back and forth between set?
Well, also with remote work, right? The immediacy of this, you had to be in LA, right? If you wanted to be relevant. And what's happened now when we're all connected and you can shoot a show anywhere and there's crews that work in all of these various places. I mean, like, frankly, LA is an ivory tower that doesn't solve a problem
Hmm. Hmm.
and it's overpriced.
So I'm gonna just shift gears for a second of the fallout of what's happening, right? Because you may have heard more about this, and I'm actually curious. Is like the people I'm actually starting to get worried for outside of people that work in film and television are the periphery, right? So let me be more specific, like the food trucks, the rentals studios who are renting all the equipment. I know for a fact, Sony, and I'm sure you've been there before, is there's a lot of restaurants. There's a restaurant row that's out of Sony, right? Studios that, everybody would go on break. They would walk to the restaurants and it was really great. A lot of those restaurants are in trouble and people are forgetting that, the economy that's driven within Los Angeles directly comes from the film industry. So that's not just like the restaurants there, that's entertainment, that's nightlife. Like this place is slowly decaying, and I would love your thoughts on that.
Not slowly, rapidly. And
Rapidly. Okay.
and what I would say on top of that is there's other stuff that's happening. It's leading to cash grabs that are also accelerating the process. So, and there's nobody currently looking out for the film industry in Los Angeles, which is crazy. So under Garcetti and under other mayors prior to that, there used to be a film czar, right? That was an actual position. There is no film czar in Los Angeles anymore. There's no one looking out for whose job it is to look out for the industry that is largely responsible for 1 in 5 jobs in that city. And on top of that, you have this crazy thing where they're building all of these electronic billboards, these massive billboards. There's like 70 something of them that they're going to put everywhere. And they're going to be putting them in like horrifically stupid locations. They're electronic billboards that you're going to have to, if you're shooting in iconic locations, like Union Station and a lot of these other places, there's now massive billboards that you have to remove from your shots. And so they're making it very hard because they're broke. And most of these studios are broke. Paramount's for sale. They've mortgaged their futures, much like the US that is deeply in debt. These studios are deeply in debt. The only difference is the US can print more money, whereas studios can't print more money. They need to get purchased by a tech company that's going to completely undermine their model or get rolled into what that tech company is doing. And so you're seeing an economy in Los Angeles transform, and you're seeing greed mixed with desperation, frankly, destroy an ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny that you're mentioning that specifically, is because I have context to this, right? That I just recently saw, which was the movie Roadhouse, right? Roadhouse was very public, a war between essentially Jeff Bezos and the director of that movie. And the war was that, the director obviously wanted to be a film release. It went straight to Prime, right? And it kind of like ties into what you're talking about with the greed because because of that single decision, royalties were affected for everyone that worked on that film, right? It's now like a streamer, right? And so there's the whole economy of box office sales that are totally removed from it. And it's kind of insane that this is becoming the norm.
Well, I mean, I think that works great for Jeff Bezos.
I mean,
It's a
that's
great
fair.
model for him. Like, oh, great. I get the Prime premiere. And oh, I'm sure he's sitting back and thinking about how do I make sure I put money in the pocket of all the people that worked on it and make sure that they're treated fairly on their next job, because that's the model. I don't think that's happening. That's deep sarcasm, by the way.
Yeah.
They're not looking out for the little people that work on these movies. They're not looking out for creators' rights. They're looking out for how do we inflate stock prices and how do we grab every last dollar to exploit intellectual property.
So my question is like, when does it break, right? Because even in the financial world, right, things break. That's why we have recessions. That's why, Wall Street crashes. And I know you're a capitalist. I'm a capitalist. And, not in the traditional sense where we're just trying to make money all the time, but like we do appreciate like a free and open market, to be more specific.
Mhm.
And the market generally is always right. right? Like the market prices things appropriately to a degree, right? Outside of the 2001 run up where everybody's
Oh, the
just gambling.
market's going to correct itself. But here's
Yeah.
the thing. Um, you are now, if you have an audience and you have eyeballs and you have a commodity, right? You're looking around, and look, I actually have a friend who's getting ready to put a movie out and is talking to studios, and they're like, "Hey, you got to run that movie through us. It made money." And he put his last movie out and released it himself, and he did all of the work and distribution deals himself,
Mhm.
and was able to go and connect those contacts and leverage all of the deals. And he's making the new movie in a similar way and using all of this infrastructure that's already there. If you can leverage that for yourself, he's just like, well, I don't really know what you're offering me that I can't just do myself.
Yeah,
And
fair enough.
so this is the revenge of it. Once people keep getting those, like, hey, I did the glamour and glitz thing, and all I got for it was a empty bank account, they're going to be like, look, if I'm going to do this, I'm just going to make content for myself. What do I need you for? Like, what problem are you solving? I can host my own videos. I can build my own network. I can create my own email list. I can create my own audience. I can market to them directly. My fans can support my content. And since you're just trying to screw me anyway, why would I even work with you?
So, I mean, I'm going to level with you, and you're saying exactly what I was saying during the strike. You know what my solution is to solve all this? And everybody thought I was crazy and wrote me off. But I'm a nerd, I'm a tech nerd, and I could actually build if I wanted to. Is I genuinely believe the guilds should build their own streaming app. I think that the
100%.
WGA, the SAG, IATSE, they should all come together and just build their own streaming app, call it Guild, right? They get all the information, right? You have a subscription price that's rolling into it. You have a governance model of people coming in. I know it's kind of traditional, but traditional model where governance is set on top of the streaming app and it's voted upon which scripts get voted in. I mean, the blacklist. Do you remember the romanticism of the blacklist? Do you remember that?
There's nothing preventing talent from coming together and creating investable money
Hmm.
based on their names, their talent, getting together, creating their own projects, and being like, actually, I just don't want to sell this to you. I want to sell this to the people who actually want to invest in our talent because they want to make something cool. And we're just going to put it out on our own platform that has proper rights that redistribute the money towards the people who actually made the stuff. And people can get together and do that. I mean, it's literally like, what would happen in basketball, right? If all the great basketball players got together and was like, why are we giving all the money to the owners? Why
Hmm.
don't we just do our own franchises, sell tickets, and go to like local gymnasiums or whatever we're going to do? Pretty soon, they'd be back in their own stadiums owning the franchises for themselves, for the players, if they actually realized that they could do that. And it's the same thing that artists do. And the problem is most artists are trained to not think about how much money they're making. They're just supposed to be happy with the check they're passed from the person who owns them. And
Hmm.
I'm saying 100% what you're recommending is exactly the way forward.
Yeah. What's so crazy is it's actually not that hard to do in a world of YouTube where literally you could make your own streaming app if you really, really, really wanted to in a month, right?
You could
I
also
myself,
like leverage your own AWS platform so Bezos will
exactly.
still get the money and you could have your own YouTube.
Yeah, it's actually kind of insane. And with the advent of blockchain technology and how we always talk about like streaming payments and how that's now enabled, you can do microtransactions on a grand scale. So basically you pay a subscription and let's say it's a flat rate of $16, right? Let's say you divide that up about through how much time you've spent on the platform minus the streaming fees, because obviously there's CDN costs, there's streaming fees, right? If you subtract that out of your $16 payment, let's say you have I don't know, $12 left. It's probably closer to 10. You have $10 left, right? You take every single cent and you then equate it to your viewing time, right? So if I spend, because most people are watching 2 hours of content a
Mhm.
day, right? You can actually define that as a finite value because there is a finite amount of time that you're going to spend watching the content. It's just math and it's
Yeah.
doable.
Yes. And also, what if what you're talking about, the guilds got together and they were like, hey, what if we leverage the blockchain and smart contracts for all of our members and our membership body owned a certain percent of all the content that we were putting out from our network and screen, and automatically when the money comes into a certain account, bam, it goes out according to the percentage of what you have.
Well, yeah, I mean, what you're describing is a DAO, right? It's a
Yeah.
decentralized autonomous organization, and so therefore there is no greed, right? I know, like people like are like, wait, Jace, did Jace just talk about communism? The answer is no, because I'm talking
No.
about a
Because
machine
communism,
doing,
there's still greed. They're still
yeah.
taking it from you. It's not a fair contract. You just like, the pigs just own the farm.
Exactly. Oh God, such a great book. We should read Animal Farm and nerd out about that because we're
Yeah.
both just loving reading and
It's a documentary, just with animals. But yeah, like it, but that's the thing. It's like people get caught in their isms, but when leveraged right, people are so scared of this technology, and artists are specifically scared of anything around. I was like, I don't want to deal with the money. I was like, well, deal with the money or you're going to get it taken from you. And a DAO basically would allow them, if constructed properly, what is it, the Byzantine general problem or something, that it's, it provides a trustless network to, based on what you have, automatically receive the benefits that you are entitled to.
yeah. But the interesting part of what you're talking about, right? This goes into two camps, right? Private, permissioned, or completely public, right? I believe that there is a reality where we could do something that's kind of a hybrid of both, right? That it is still permissioned, but it's public, so you don't
Why
have.
wouldn't it be public though? Why do you need to publish your findings quarterly? Like, why do you need to publish? You should be able to look at them in real time.
Well, so here's why, right? The reason why blockchain and Bitcoin is so interesting, and we're going to come back. We're going to come back to
Yeah.
our topic, right? And you already know this, but I'm explaining it for everyone that's watching, is that there is a public ledger, right? There is a public
Mhm.
ledger. And why I'm saying that it needs to be private permissioned, right? Is that the reason why streamers don't work today, and you said this, right, is Netflix is not publishing their data. Paramount is not publishing their data, right? And that's the problem. You don't know how to issue royalties because there is no account record saying that
Mhm.
this was the highest streaming show, right? And what I'm saying is specifically is that if you release it on a quarterly basis, okay, and by the way, just a little pin because I want to go forward on this is that I find it insane, right? That these public companies don't have to report this in their SEC filings, right? I genuinely believe on top of their subscriber counts they have, that should be public and everyone should know it, as well as the streaming per show should be known because there is an accounting value that you and I both know how to do, right?
Mhm.
We call up the UPM, get the ledger saying, oh, this show costs X amount. Here's how much it's generating. That should be public information because it's a
Yeah,
public company that's
but they're not
generating
used to
revenue.
doing it because the people that built these models are the people who built all their shell companies to hide their profits from the creators who were supposed to be getting it.
I
So
forgot. I forgot.
the way this was all created in the first place is you have 9 different, you want to really understand how Hollywood currently exists? It's the same global enterprise company owns the studio, and then they do the post-production work. They subcontract the post-production work out to the post house that they own, and
Mhm.
then they subcontract it out to the costume house that they own. But they have all these different shell companies where they can put massive amounts of money into the various ones that gradually take away from whatever they call the LLC or the intellectual property that was supposed to come in. So those investor rights have been spiraled out, creatively. It's the creative accounting in Hollywood to all of these other enterprises. Even the movie theater chains. They have pieces of all of these things, and the idea
Yeah.
is to maximize profits for themselves while making sure that the people who own the actual content get as little of that pie as possible.
Wasn't there an antitrust thing relevant to the distribution part though, right? Aren't the studios
It
and
was Coming to America back in the day with Eddie Murphy had the big, because it made like $300 million and somehow no one got residuals. Was the problem, and
yeah,
like that's
nuts.
just where we are. And look, it's adapted even worse
Mhm.
now on the streaming platforms.
Which is crazy because this is instantaneous. Like information moves at the speed of light, right? And us, literally, we can get real time analytics on YouTube. I published a video today. I know exactly how many views I had, how many likes I have, the retention time, right? Like the average view time on my latest video is like 3 minutes and 10 seconds, right? I'm like, oh man, that's great. That's like 70% of view time, watch time per user, and that's fantastic. So it's like, how are they getting away with that when we know? We know this. We know that this is
Well,
happening.
they're allowed to because nobody has stood up. Well, actually, no, there's lots of people quietly standing up and taking their careers other places and leveraging themselves. But unfortunately, the working people in Hollywood are used to having this trickle down infrastructure that comes in that really, they don't have any incentives to make money, when it comes to the average piece of content, but it does pay their union dues. It does pay all of these things. But the problem is they moved the cheese to the streaming companies who want to take all of that infrastructure away from them and move it other places where they can pay people less money, use AI to take their likenesses, put out, 9,000 versions of the same thing that they can just monetize. And it goes to shareholder profits who make none of this content. And so it's financially currently incentivized to pay shareholders versus the actual producers of the content. And I would simply recommend to the unions and all of the other people, well, you should probably just start your own streaming network and own all of your content and leverage your likeness, talent together with everyone else's so that you are the stakeholder versus people who have nothing to do with your content.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, so let's go back to the beginning real quick because I want you to tell me more about IATSE. All right, so what's going to happen? All right, the contract's coming up for negotiation in July. Is that correct?
This is apocalyptic, basically, because what's happening is everything's waiting to sort of shoot based on seeing if IATSE is going to strike or not, or what's going to happen there. So people are not scheduling a lot of shows. Meanwhile, people are behind on their mortgages. They're not working. They are starving in Hollywood. They are being bled out because if you go and like literally go into some of the Reddits around like, hey, production work in Los Angeles, right? You're going to see things like, I just got on food stamps today, or, you have no idea how bad it is in the reality TV industry and all of this. And, what's actually going to happen there, if there is another strike, is like, I don't know how Los Angeles bounces back because rent is so expensive in Los Angeles. And like you can't afford a house in Los Angeles. And if you're not working and you've got a lease and you've got an apartment lease and whatever it's just thousands and thousands of dollars going out the door with nothing coming in every month. So this is a recipe for like massive amounts of credit card debt. This is a recipe for like impoverishment of an industry.
So, but like this is my question, right? Like, what's the end game, right? And I know I should just like listen to what you're saying, but like, I'm incapable of doing that. But just help me understand this, right?
Yeah.
They're actively driving people away, right? They're driving like because you are correct. I can attest this. I still live in Los Angeles. Rents are going up astronomically, right? It's crazy. And so my question is, when they drive everyone away and they put everyone into poverty, and you said 1 in 5 jobs are based in the entertainment industry, what happens to California? Like, what happens here? Like, I mean, it's crazy that they're intentionally destroying the economy. Is there an end game? Have they thought it through?
Well, this is you have to think that I actually think there is not an end game because I don't think there's a set of people who actually control this. I think this is like some toxic waste. Imagine there's a toxic waste spill, right? So something spills out and they can no longer control the mess, right? And so when that happens, or if a dam breaks and there's a flood, right? There's going to be a period where all hell breaks loose while this dam has broken and there's stuff going everywhere. And what is the real solution to that problem? Time and not being there. And that's what I really think the answer is right now, which is there are things in motion in Los Angeles currently that cannot be stopped. I don't think there's people who have thought anything through the same way that, like, if you look at who's running our country, like, they're not thinking things through. There's people who are just victims of those decisions. And the question is, where are you in relation to that? And how are you navigating around those decisions? And you just have to be aware that, in certain parts of the world, developing nations or whatever, there's lots of poverty, right? And the US is used to being a place where, oh, that doesn't happen here. But if you go to India, you get a different picture. and there's a class-based society. And so what I think the end game is, you have something more similar to what you have in India and Los Angeles,
Okay. I mean,
which has already happened in San Francisco.
yeah, and I'm very familiar with that because I travel there all the time.
Yeah.
So I mean, I can buy into that. I can see that. All right, so let's get a little
I think
positive.
well, and actually, so let's think about this. So play that out, right? So okay, massive spiraling rents in Los Angeles. Who
Yeah,
can afford those?
only the rich.
Okay. So you have lots of people in palatial places, and then you have lots of people not in those places, gathering the crumbs around it. And then what does that resemble to you?
But like this is where I struggle, right? So there's a missing element here, right?
Yeah.
So when poverty increases, and this isn't judgmental, but typically crime increases, right? Because people are just trying to make it, right? Whatever their life circumstances, they're just trying to make it. And when poverty increases, it also affects the infrastructure, right? This affects schools, it affects medical facilities, it affects the police, right? And so I can meet you where you're at, but this is America, right?
But you can't leave your car out in Los Angeles right now.
Correct. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I'm not disagreeing because you just look at SF, and you see the amount of break-ins, the crime, the drugs. I mean, it's insane. And Baltimore, actually, I think it was a stat, and I haven't confirmed this, but I read it on the internet, so it must be true. Is at one point there was only 6 police per like million people. It was something crazy like that.
Yeah. Well, Pittsburgh. I thought I saw the thing with Pittsburgh with that, but it might be. Yeah, there's some weird stuff going on.
Yeah,
Oakland's not in a good place.
yeah, and so it might have been Oakland, but you get what I'm saying. Is basically the infrastructure of California is failing, right? It's failing, and I find that really crazy because the rich, right, that you just talked about, all right, are they going to stay in locations like that with no infrastructure?
Oh, Google around rich building their own communities. They're building their own towns that they're all going to live in together.
Little 15-minute cities.
Yeah. So like this is I think, the truth of the matter is some of these cities are not going to come back. Look at what happened to Detroit, right? So, but that does not mean, I think when you saw what happened during the pandemic, you saw a repollination of people around the globe. And if you were smart, you went to a place where your money went a little bit further and you could get a cushy remote job and save some cash.
Guess who wasn't smart, Sam? Guess who wasn't smart? I stayed here. But I will give you credit. You called me. I think we were at that point in the pandemic. I think we were both depressed and we were talking to each other at least once every 2 weeks. You were telling me, he was like, dude, you gotta get out of there. You gotta get out of there. So I want to give you credit. You warned me and you were correct. I cannot deny it. You were correct.
Well, I don't want to be right. I have so many friends out there, but I just feel like some of this is like a public service announcement because I think sometimes you can see storm clouds and you're like, oh, it's going to rain. And like you see people out, having a picnic or whatever, and they're just like not paying attention that there's a storm. And then, it doesn't stop the storm from coming.
All right, so we got like 8 minutes left, right? Like, give me hope, Sam. We need some hope here.
There's so much hope. So that's the other thing too. So I actually fundamentally think technology creates as many solutions as it causes problems for all of the reasons that we just described. I actually have a friend who made his horror movie, put it out, December of last year, the holiday. They made a ton of money as independent producers, putting out their own money, their own movie through the traditional Hollywood system. They kept everything themselves. They did it, and they're doing it again this year. They're shooting their next movie in May. They own all of the rights to everything they're doing. They own their own content. They are their own distributor. They are leveraging the existing infrastructure to their own advantage. They own their own platform and are making their own deals. And because things are so decentralized now, and because you can now work with anyone anywhere, and because fundamentally content is largely disposable, I think the hope is that for the people with the authentically great ideas and the authentically interesting stories who can effectively leverage Hollywood style marketing, which now can cost pennies on the dollar for themselves, you see people, creators all over the world, tons of them, influencers, right? Like they're the future. They're their own creators. Be your own boss, make your own stuff and leverage this, solve a problem with your content, build your niche, and you can actually create your own career where you don't have a boss, you don't have a studio because you no longer need them because they don't solve a problem.
So, okay, there's a through line that you've been saying and you've been like planting, right? I feel like you're just the best farmer of all time. You've just been sowing the field of this and implanting in our minds, which is the call to action. You're saying that creators need to be in charge of their own destiny and that the vertical integration of the studio system is going to dissipate into the hands of those who really want to take it. Right, to be their own distribution, to be their own creators, whether it be writing scripts or videographers or cinematographers or actors. You're saying to do the whole thing on your own, and then this is the call to action, the opportunity to take power back.
Let's truly think about this, Jace.
Mhm.
What problem does the studio solve anymore for creatives that they can't do themselves?
So I have a complex answer, right? I believe the studio system inherently is a great tool to teach people how to be better creators. Now, I could also counter argue that that's what you have YouTube for. So it depends on like how hungry are you, right? Are you the type of person?
Oh no, if you're hungry,
Yeah.
what problem do they solve that you can't solve for yourself?
I mean, I don't really have an answer for that because like I know that I can build my own OTT app. I can build it right now.
Yeah. So
Like I
that
really
didn't
wanted
used to be the case. So this is for the people who truly love this and want to do this and want to be their own creator. Like we now live in an age where you drive your own car because the infrastructure they have is identical. The weapons they have are identical to the ones you have at your disposal, and you can get access to the infrastructure and leverage that however you want, the same way they do.
Just one little closing note from me, and then I want you to close it out because you're leading this charge, buddy. Is that the thing that I'm the most passionate about, and you know this vehemently, you probably roll your eyes at me while we're talking on the phone sometimes, is technology, right? And I think that technology's gotten so good, right? It's gotten so good to the point where right? This thing in my pocket can shoot cinematic quality, right? Like cinematic quality. And to most, they won't even know that you're watching something that's shot on an iPhone. I mean, literally, the Apple keynote, I think it was like a year and a half ago, was shot on an iPhone, right? Because it's that good. And we're getting that with, lavalier mics that you can fit in your pocket, cameras that, are incredible, fit in your pocket. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the barrier to entry that the studio system used to provide with red cameras, right? And, key grips and people holding, the poles with microphones on the end, is that now truly necessary? And not necessary. I'm going to rephrase because I do like that quality. Is it something that you can forego if you just want to create?
Jace, we are witnessing right now a perfect storm, in my opinion, which is, and this has happened before, right? So in the 50s and early 60s, the studios ran out of ideas. They just were recycling same things, putting out, like constant stuff. Nobody was going. Everything was completely unoriginal, inherently boring. Because they had no ideas. They became risk averse, and art does not thrive in risk averse areas. So we've been in blockbuster culture for 30 years. And what has happened simultaneously is that technology has now leveled up to the point where your average creator can literally, like, we're talking about people having AI make an entire feature film for them based on, whatever's going on with Sora and all of that. So when you take the creatively bankrupt ideas that are on the one side, mixed with complete technological independence for the average person, where the cost of making anything, in fact, if anything, Hollywood's infrastructure is going to work against them because they need to think that their movies need to cost $300 million or $1 billion. They bank on that it has to be expensive because that's their only differentiator, right? So when you think about that, from a pure like perfect storm perspective, you can get a group of people together in any part of this country, and if they know what they're doing, They can make a movie just like the studios. In fact, frankly, considerably more efficiently. They could shoot with iPhones. You can shoot ProRes on an iPhone now and leverage all of this stuff through. And like you could screen all of this stuff off of your laptop at a higher resolution than you're seeing in the typical movie theater that works off a 2K projector. And you could do this on a completely ProRes XQ flawless presentation and do this right off a solid state hard drive and have the best screening of your life in your backyard. This is the world that we have at our fingertips, where you could literally get together with your friends and work at a higher level than Hollywood typically does, significantly more efficiently, and do it for practically nothing with devices you're using to like scroll the internet. And I'm simply saying, um, this is disruptive. And the second everyone figures this out, and the second that they leverage their own smart contracts and they leverage all of this existing technology to their own advantage versus creatively bankrupt people who are trying to exploit them, the world will change immediately.
Wow. Okay. I mean, I'm good. I'm good. Let's end it, man. Like that's you've given me a lot to digest. Like give me a closing thought. Give me a closing thought. Like just I mean, wow.
Own your own story because it doesn't cost anything with current technology.
Okay, like dude, every time I hang out with you, I feel like I gotta get like a new tattoo. Like that just feels like it just like, right here just feels needs to be close to my heart. So that was fantastic. Sam, man, it's always so good talking to you, and I'm glad we started doing this.
Yeah, me too, man. This is fun. I've been sitting around, look, I've got probably one more episode like this, and then we're gonna have to start bringing in some guests because I'm out of material. But like, this is, we'll talk about NLEs next week. But the reality is, I think we are at an inflection point for content creators where the only limitations that any of them have are the ones that they perceive because of the industry that they've been brought up in.
Okay. Well, Sam, I think we're gonna end it. What do you think? You think we're good for this episode?
I'm good if you're good.
All right. Well, guys, that's gonna be it. Actually, you know what, Sam? You're gonna close it out. Close it out for everybody.
I'm going to close it with if you're listening to this, I want to know what you all want us to be talking about because we have a lot of opinions and there's a lot of different ways this show can go. I'm interested in technology and how this affects creative people, creative freedom, and where we all want this to go because I think we've been in very much a fear-based discussion. And, the truth of the matter is you're looking at the richest country in the world freaking out over, oh, they're going to take away all of our stuff. And I just sat here telling you that like stuff doesn't really cost any money anymore. So what are we all worried about? How do we want to leverage our resources to build a better world? That's what I want this podcast to be
All right. Well, guys, this is the end. Thank you for watching. We appreciate you. And, catch us next time on the Elevate podcast. Peace.